Well, in this city update, I'm joined by two special friends of mine. I have Sheila Thomas Ambach. She's the interim director for the Public Services Department and the assistant director for Developmental Services Department, Michael Martin. And now, Sheila, if you could tell me a little bit, we got this very colorful map here. Could you tell me a little bit about what this map depicts and the significance of what we're seeing here?
Right. What you see here is a FEMA regulated map. It's a map created by the FEMA floodplain program. And what you see specifically in red is the areas that are regulated by FEMA, and what you see off in green and in blue are areas outside of the FEMA regulated floodplain that could be regulated by outside communities through other regulations, but in this case is not specifically regulated by FEMA. I'm going to quickly talk about how a stream is made up. A stream is made up of three broad areas. What we have is the main part of the stream channel, which is called the floodway. The areas outside of the floodway, which is called the floodway fringe. And then we have areas that are even outside of those that are typically used to carry or convey the 500-year flood event. The floodway and the floodway fringe typically carry the 100-year flood event. Regulation is not allowed in the floodway. It is allowed within a community's restrictions in the floodway fringe, and could also be allowed in the areas outside of the floodway fringe. That's all I have specifically about this map. I'll let Michael take on some other questions.
Well, I do have some. So the red, that's was it the 100-year floodplain? Is that correct?
Right. So the red area that you see, what you don't see here is actually a blue. There will be a blue in the middle of this area of the red. That is the actual floodway, and then you have the floodway fringe, which includes the blue as well as the red. The red is basically the area that conveys the 100-year flood, or the probability of that flood happening in any given 1 year is 1%. And then the areas outside of the red that you don't see here are the 500-year flood. The probability of that flood occurring in any given 1 year is 0.02.
Now, this is a living document, so this can be updated and changed as needed as, for example, new growth comes into the community, because that does affect the stormwater. So this is a living document, correct?
It is a living document. It is updated. This one in particular was last updated, I believe, in 2007. And so it is up for renewal for another update whenever we are on cycle for another update. And it becomes a living document because it is what mortgage companies use to determine if you're required to get insurance or not when you buy property that's in a FEMA-regulated stream. Again, you are not required to buy insurance for anything outside of a FEMA-regulated stream, but it's important to note that regardless of where you are, if your community is part of the CRS system, you can get flood insurance. You don't have to be in a FEMA-regulated stream in order to get flood insurance. You could be in any one of these other areas outside of a FEMA-regulated stream to get FEMA insurance.
And that kind of brings us to the next part of what we're talking about with the flood insurance is because this is a living document, this is something that I understand city staff is working closely with state and federal authorities to make sure we get this updated to represent communities like Locks Creek, who is flooded out in both Florence and Matthew.
Absolutely, Gavin. So one thing that Sheila made a very good point on is that these are based on probabilities. Probabilities of flooding within certain hazard areas, whether you're in the 500-year, 100-year, or outside. Does that mean that your property will not flood if you're outside of a floodplain? No, it does not. You still have a risk of flooding. Does it mean that your property will definitely flood inside of a floodplain? No, there is a probability that it may occur. So all of the floodplains are based upon probabilities. And as everything in life, everything changes. So the last update of the FEMA maps were conducted in 2007. Since then, we've seen areas that are not encompassed in a floodplain that have had multiple occurrences of flooding with events like Matthew and Florence, Locks Creek, for example. So we are in conversation with the state and FEMA to ask for additional studies on that area to see if they do meet the floodplain criteria.
And I understand this map is really instrumental in helping, I guess, with enforcement of the ordinances and inspections and permitting and all that. Your department, a lot of what you do. Tell me a little bit about how that has an impact of what your department does.
Great question. So if you live in a floodplain or a flood hazard area, that doesn't just mean you by namesake you live in a floodplain. To build, to construct, to redevelopment within a special flood hazard area requires more restrictions, certain restrictions that are not in place outside. For instance, in a 100-year floodplain, there is what we call a BFE, base flood elevation. We want to make sure that your house or whatever you're intending building is above that base flood elevation to reduce the risk of flooding. That does not mean that it will not flood. We're reducing the risk of flooding in that area.
Gotcha. Well, I do appreciate all the great information both of you have supplied, and keep following us on City Updates. We provide you more information on issues such as this and others in the future. Thank you for watching.